Man, records are fun. Here we go. Mr. Roboto. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. So, this talk is not about records today. It's related in a weird way because something that I'm going to 3D print is going to be a holder for a record. But I am pleased to announce that after a great deal of turmoil, trial, more trial and error, and then some trial, I did successfully get a Calamity Ender 5 Pro to print. Now, this is not my printer. This is a printer that was loaned to me by Tim on the channel so that I could print something for my sister who recently made a thrifty purchase and then needed to replace a couple of plastic parts on it. It was a Nespresso coffee machine, one of the big Virtuo Pod Nespressos, but she got a good deal on it. She got it used and it was missing a lid and some other parts. So she did the homework and she found a recipe, if you will, a 3D model for just the lid that goes on the water tank and asked me if I could print that for her. Tim came through in the clutch and provided a monster of a 3D printer, if you guys are familiar with the Ender 5 Pro. So I've got some opinions about this particular 3D printer, but we'll get to those later. This is to say, holy cow, I got it working and I got it printed. And what I printed is actually in this shot, if you can spot it. It's me. I've 3D printed myself. This is really amazing. It was very difficult. Hang on just a minute, Aaron. It was very difficult for me to get all the articulation and these roguish good looks to come through in the print, but lo and behold, they have. I'm just kidding. What I actually printed was a viola holder. It was my first big print after getting the lids that my sister wanted printed for my youngest daughter, who has picked up the viola as her instrument of choice. Right now being displayed in the viola holder is actually a multi-disc Smashing Pumpkins record vinyl set, but the viola itself is not here. It's actually at the school. But as you can see, it works just fine for presenting something as large as the Smashing Pumpkins record. It's a very handsome 3D print. Here, we'll take the record off of it so you might be able to see it. I'll do some detail shots so that it's a little clearer. But this is the device itself, and as you can see, it's just a nice, nicely designed, well-made little doodad that the viola would sit in. There's a little spot on the side where you can put the bow, and it's got a nice little music-related thing engraved into the top of it. That was fun. But yeah, as we go along, today we're going to take a look at what was involved in printing the lid, printing this, and then some of the trial and error as well to go along with that. So, Calamity the First. All right, so to start things off, things went really smoothly getting this printer set up. Most of the hard work was already done by Tim and his kids, who have had this printer for several years. And among the things that they've done to improve this printer are the inclusion of a titanium hot end. So the little nozzle that goes on the bottom of the hot end really is made of titanium. Why would you do this? One, titanium's awesome. Two, some of the print materials, like some of the filament that you pass through it, can be abrasive. So depending on what you use, things that have bits of wood embedded or metallic or carbon fiber or nylon, things like that can gradually erode a brass nozzle, which is what comes with a printer like this. Secondly, they added another motorized feeder. So it comes with excuse me, good chili. It comes with a set of gears that sort of draw down the filament and pass it in between the teeth of the gears to push it through. But one of the flaws with the original design led to a lot of issues with breakage and the speed that the filament was being passed through. So they upgraded that part of the hot end as well. So there's an additional bit on the top there. There's a bunch of other little features and little improvements that they made along with that, such as replacing the power supply, which improves the heating and cooling abilities of the printer itself. But all of that aside, all of that stuff is already done. And for the most part, the bed that it prints on, which has to be perfectly level, had also been leveled out by them. So my first print, being the coffee pot lid, actually went really well. I got that printed out and ready to go, and moved on from that to my next rather large print, which was this, was going to be an attempt at printing this viola stand. So I got that started, and it actually ran for probably about 8 or 9 hours completely flawlessly. I had very high hopes. It was a very high print quality, good looking print, except for one little detail, and that is that the filament, which comes off of a spool in the back and up and over the top, and kind of goes into the top of the hot end, it had broken off. It had snapped off. So the thing was basically just printing air into the room, which was really cool. I should probably sell that idea to NASA. Yeah, I was pretty upset, especially after waiting 8 or 9 hours to see a fail. As a matter of fact, hang on. Here it is. Here is the partially printed viola stand from my my number 2 print after the lid. As you can see, it's really quite snazzy. I love the filament. You can't really see it very well at this distance, but it's actually got little black flecks in it. It looks like cookies and cream ice cream. It's a really cool thing. It's probably better described as looking almost like marble once it's done. And if we hold them up side by side, you can see that it was already pretty well on its way to being done. If you think about it, you know, there's actually less material up here to print, so it was probably, I would estimate, between 8 and 9 hours into the print out of a 16-hour print. So about halfway done there. Living on a prayer, no less. Here, I'll set this one up here on the display to be rotated for everybody. So that is Calamity the First, which led, of course, to Calamity the Second. I don't even know how to get started talking about this one. Calamity the Second. All right, so given that the actual error that caused the failed print was the filament breaking off, I did a whole bunch of research on how to properly store, contain, and prepare filament. And one of the things that you'll see if you go out onto the YouTube is that there is no end of videos that go way into detail on how to use not only this specific printer, but how to handle things in general, like filament and bed leveling and things like that. And drying out your filament was one of the hottest topics. And there are tons and tons of different, products out there and things you can use to dry your filament. But one of the videos really caught my attention, and it was pointing out that, this is just physics, folks. There's basically, if you have warm, dry air around something, it's going to wick out the moisture, and as long as you keep that air moving, you can accomplish the same goal. So I built this contraption that actually uses a cardboard box with some ventilation in it, and you use the bed, the heated bed for the printer itself to warm the air up, and then convection pulls the external dry air, cool air in, warms it up, and then as it gets warmer, it escapes through the holes and pulls the moisture out of the box. This is a long way of saying that I ultimately over-dried the filament that I was using, which led to a whole bunch of fun in terms of the prints. And one of the things that happens when your filament is not exactly in the right range of moisture is that it can dry out and it can clog the print nozzle. So a combination of things led to me having several much more quickly failed attempts at printing this particular stand over here. But ultimately what I discovered was that I was clogging the nozzle. And so thankfully I had a whole bunch of brass nozzles from my previous printer laying around that I was able to substitute in. Don't worry, Tim, I still have the titanium nozzle set aside. It just needs to be cleared out because not only was the over-dried filament causing the nozzle to clog, but the bed leveling on especially the Calamity Ender 5 Pro is a beast in itself, and that is actually Calamity the Third. Earlier you guys probably thought I was exaggerating when I said trial and trial and trial and error and trial, but there was if you look at the chat messages between Tim and Freddie and myself, they had to sit through a tirade of, oh, it's going to work. And then, oh, it failed again. But this is the bed leveling tribulations, which is something that I feel like I should have a PhD in now. I watched tons of videos on the topic, many of them actually created and produced by Creality itself to explain this whole process. But long story short, there's something about this printer that causes it to sort of lose track of reality. So you can actually perfectly level the bed, get everything exactly right, and the printer will just kind of on its own decouple from our cosmos and start operating in a totally different frame of reference. I'm kind of surprised that aliens didn't start pouring out of the machine because it opened some portal to another dimension. In reality, it just sort of like loses a step or two on the stepper motor and loses track of the settings that you've done. So it'll think it's exactly where you have calibrated it to, but it'll be like, a half a millimeter or a millimeter off kilter. So it's very persnickety in that regard. You have to be very careful with this printer not to press too hard on the printing surface because it'll cause the motors to turn a little bit. And then there's sort of like a magical thing that can happen sometimes where it'll just sort of decide that its home position is like a whole, 100 millimeters lower than it thinks it should be, or than you think it should be, or that you told it that it was, or, oh my gosh, I'm going right back into that place again. But eventually, I did get all of these settings right. I discovered that you don't actually have to do the in-depth, sort of bed leveling process as often with this one. Like once you get everything sort of set, for the most part, you can sort of just kind of use one reference point, which is the center point. It does have some advanced capabilities where it will actually map other deformities in the bed, because as perfectly level as you think something might be, there's always like a tiny little variation around it. But ultimately what I ended up doing was getting the distance between the print nozzle and the surface of the bed to be about the distance of a sheet of paper. And then since it had mapped out the rest of the bed, I just sort of said, okay, this is the golden rule here. I've got it exactly where I want it. Now go print the thing. And that's what ended up leading to this wonderful printout that you see here that I nearly dropped in the previous scene. And it's got a few minor things that I would like to sort of figure out, but I'm going to go ahead and call this one a W and take the win. And we will continue sort of tweaking it. As a matter of fact, I'm done tweaking it for at least the next 3 days, because I'm going to Dragon Con and I'm going to be hyper-focused on that. Hopefully you guys will see some material from that in the next couple of weeks as we get it all in the can. Because we're going to do this in 2 parts. We're going to shoot some footage at Dragon Con, and then we're going to get together, just us fellas over at Tim's place at the Tim Studios, and we're going to talk about it over a root beer or something and a slice of pizza and just have a generally nice time. You're all invited, figuratively speaking, to watch it later. If you show up in person, I will be very concerned. How do you end these things? I don't know. It's over. It's done. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice one. What are you still doing here? This is all very confusing. Like, I know you're there. I just can't see you. So now it's not the time for an existential crisis, Aaron. Let's move on. Got some chili to eat.